Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome to my new series, CNC and Laser Projects That Sell. Hey, what's up everybody? Thanks for coming back. If you've been here before, if you're new, thanks for tuning in. You're not going to want to miss this. In this series, I'll be taking you through a deep dive into my favorite CNC or laser projects that I've actually sold. We'll be working from start to finish, showing all the steps in the process, from design to creation. And I'm also going to link the .cd3 files in the description below so you can make this project yourself, either for fun or to sell. If you're new to CNCs or lasers, this series is going to be for you, so stick around. So today we're going to be making a family sign on the Shapeoko 5 Pro. These have always been a really great seller for me because they are so customizable. You can choose different paint, wood species, quotes, fonts to really make these unique and to give your customer exactly what they want. Feel free to get started with the template file that I'm providing, but also customize it so you can make it your own. Customization is key to selling these in my experience. As always, we're going to be using Carbide Create for our design and also to make our toolpaths. And in this episode, we're going to be introducing a new toolpath which we haven't used before, the advanced V-carve. So let's go ahead and load up Carbide Create and get designing. All right, so here we are in Carbide Create. Let's go ahead and make this sign. So here's our completed artwork here. And if I take you to the toolpath sections, you can see what I did with the toolpaths here. And let's go ahead and simulate. And here we go. This is what we should be getting at the end when we're all said and done. And now let me show you how I got there. So let's go back to our design tab. We'll go ahead and clear our artwork off to the side here. We'll use this as a reference. And like always, first thing we're going to do is go to the job setup wheel here. We're going to click on that. We're going to put in our stock size. In this case, our piece is 16 inches by 20 inches. And it is 0.77 inches thick. I measured that with digital calipers. We are zeroing from the top. Our toolpath is starting from the lower left side. Our material is softwood. We're on our Shapeoko 5 Pro. I have the retract height set at 0.3 inches, and we're using inches for this project. Always remember to start with the job setup first. Now for our artwork, we're going to start with a rectangle, and I'm just going to make this 16 inches by 20 inches, and I'm going to go ahead and align this with our grid here. And this rectangle is just going to give us a place to assign our chamfer toolpath, but it's also going to let us align all of our different artwork on the project. Okay, so now let's start with the text. The first text we're going to start with is the and family here. We're going to start with these two. The font that I use with this is called Engravings MT. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. And I'm going to start with the, set at 1.5 inches. I'm going to drag that in the general area. I'm going to create a new text box. And I'm going to write in here family, again at 1.5 inches. Move that to the general area. Okay, now we'll do the Johnson here, the family name. So I'm going to choose a different font for that. I'm going to choose a font called Dandelion. And I'm going to write in the name. And for this one, I'm just going to drag this to the general area. I'm going to use the scale tool. And I'm just going to drag here on the top corner just to kind of make this as big as I can. I want to fill a lot of the space here with this. This is kind of the focal point of the sign. That looks about right to me. So one note about the fonts. When you download this file, if you do not have these two fonts installed on your computer, it's just going to load like Arial or something, or some basic font. So it may not look exactly like what I'm giving you, but all you got to do is just download the fonts. These are free fonts that I found online. I just did a Google search for them and put them on my computer. Once they're on your computer, they're going to automatically be in Carbide Create. So just a little note on that. You will also notice that my name here looks a little bit different than my example file here. Let me show you how I fix this. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to weld these together. Okay, so in order to do that, we're going to go ahead and highlight our text box here. We're going to actually double click it, bring up our text editor again, and we're going to click on this button here that says convert to curves. And what that's going to do is that's going to separate all of these vectors here. Now I can select all these little pieces. Okay, so now we have all of these vectors separated. I'm going to select them all. I'm going to go to our Boolean tool. I'm going to click on the weld option. So the blue here or purple is showing you what's going to stay, and the orange is going to go away. So I don't want that one, because if I did it, it's going to take away all the little spots inside the O's. What I want to do is I want to select the second one where it says Smart Weld. And that's going to take out these little overlaps here. So once I go ahead and click OK here, you can see we've removed those. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and highlight my text again, and I'm going to group this all together. So now we've got one solid piece, and it matches what I did here on the right. So that's a really important step that you're going to want to take whenever you're using font that kind of overlaps like this. It doesn't matter with this Engravers MT font that I used. None of the vector lines overlap. So now let's add the family names here. We're going to add a third text box. The font that I'm going to be using for this one is called Delighty, and we're going to leave it at 1.5 inches right now. There we go. And this is another one of these fonts where we have some overlap in some of these letters. So I'm going to go ahead and click on these. Again, go back to our text editing box, convert to curves, Boolean tool, Smart Weld, verify I'm removing what I want to here. And for some reason, it always wants to remove this E here. I think because maybe they're touching. Let me see if I can fix that. I can just manually drag this out of the way. Manually move this a little bit. Let's see if that fixes it. So back to the Boolean tool, Smart Weld. Yep. So now we're not going to remove that part of the E anymore, just all of our little overlaps. This part of the T here would have created a weird carve. Let's see how that looks. Okay, not bad. One thing I don't like is this part of the T here. So let me see what I can do about that. I'm going to undo this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to move this T over a little bit like that. And I'm going to do that with the other set of T's. Let's see how that looks. Yeah, much better. So it just goes to show sometimes you got to play around with the individual letters in these fonts, especially these kind of like really thin fonts like this. I don't like to go much thinner than this because sometimes they could be hard to V-carve and especially to paint. But sometimes you just have to manually move some of the individual pieces around just to make it fit a little bit better. But I'm happy with that right now, so I'm going to go ahead and group these together. So let's go ahead and add our last two boxes of text here. We're going to use the same Delighty text font, and I'm going to write in our little saying here. We may not have it all together. That's going to be one. I'm going to create a new box here and write, but we have it all. And I'll go ahead and clean up this font real quickly here. All right, and finally, the last element of our design here are these two little designs here. Where I got those from is from the art library. So there's a library inside Carbide Create. If you go up to the top menu, click on Library, Show Library. This is going to give you a bunch of different artwork that you can use. And it's simple stuff, but it's useful. I mean, there's stars. I use the stars a lot for flags. There's also US flags and various other flags. And so there's some pretty cool stuff in here. But where I found that was under Flourishes. I chose Flourishes number 6. You just double click on that. It's going to import it into your space here. I just deleted a few of these shapes here to give me this one. And I'm going to use the rotate tool to rotate it 90 degrees. And I'm going to use the scale tool to scale it down. Command C to copy that. Command V to paste it. I'm using a Mac, Control C, Control V on a PC. And then I want to go ahead and flip this one. I'm going to mirror this, so I'll just click on the mirror horizontal button. And there we go. We have all of our elements. Now we just need to kind of place things and line everything up. So I'm going to start at the top and work my way down. I'm going to single click on my first text, the. I'm going to hold down Shift and click on my perimeter box. I'm going to go here to my alignment tool, and I'm going to align this horizontally. Same thing with Johnson. Okay. And family, I'm going to raise this up a little bit. This is all by eye. You know, you can do anything you want, however you like it. So I'm just going to kind of put this where I want it vertically. And now I'm going to align it horizontally. That looks pretty good. Okay, good. You know, and I'm not really happy with this the. I want to move this down just a little bit. So I'm just going to use my arrow keys. You can go up and down slightly. It's just kind of moving it on my grid. My grid is set at 1/4 inch. That looks good there. Just making sure the and family are aligned, which they were. I just like to double check that kind of stuff. Okay, next with my list of names here, I'm going to bring this up vertically a little bit. I want this closer to family. Size looks good. And let's align this centered. We're going to click on our little quote here, and we're going to click on the quote first, both those two elements. We're going to align both of these horizontal. So those are centered. Now I'm going to group those together since they're centered now. And I'm going to move them up a little bit. It looks pretty good. And align again to my box. And now our little design here. So I kind of eyeball these so they're horizontally, or so they're aligned with each other, but let's just move them out of whack like this, and I'll show you how to align that. Oh, it's really simple. Just shift click both of our design elements here, go to our align vectors tab, and this time we're going to align vertically. Okay, so that pops those in alignment. I'm going to group those now so that doesn't get out of whack, and now I can move them all as a unit. I kind of want that centered with my text here, so let's see what that looks like horizontally. Okay, and then vertically. Okay, I like the way that looks. We'll group that together, so now this is all one unit, and we'll shift click our perimeter box and make sure we're aligned horizontally, which we are, and there we go. It's looking pretty good. We'll just take one final look at it here. It's always a good idea just to kind of eyeball these again and make sure it's what you like. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to group everything together minus my perimeter box, and I'm going to click my perimeter box, hold down shift, and we're just going to do one final alignment in horizontal and vertical directions. We'll see if we're good here. So yeah, that didn't even move it at all. We're good. We're aligned top and bottom, left and right. I like it. So now all we got to do is make the toolpaths. So now that we're going to make the toolpaths, I went ahead and ungrouped everything so that I basically just have all the text connected here. You can see all of our text and our little design element here are all separated. The small text here and this design element is all going to be V-carved with a 60-degree V-bit. So we'll click on V-carve, use current selection, go to our tool here, we're going to edit, select tool. We're going to go to our carbide 3D library for soft wood. Double click on that, go to our V-bits, and I'm going to be using a number 302 60-degree V-bit. Hit OK. And I'm going to leave the feeds and speeds here stock from what Carbide 3D recommends, just as a start. After we're done running our simulation and seeing what time we're looking at, we'll go ahead and edit these a little bit to kind of speed up our production a little bit. Click OK. Remember, for V-carving, we always want to use the stock bottom as our max depth. So everyone always asks me about this, and I know it sounds kind of weird, like the bit's going to plunge all the way through the material, but in reality it's not. So whenever you're V-carving, the V-bit is going to plunge in the center between two vectors here, between two lines, and it's going to plunge down far enough until both sides of the bit, the V portion of the bit, touch the outside lines. All right, so if you have a wide line, like here, for example, where my mouse pointer is, the bit's going to plunge in a little bit deeper than, for example, on this, between these two lines here, where they're a little bit skinnier. It's not going to have to plunge down quite as much to be able to connect those two lines. Now, I like to use a 60-degree V-bit for small, kind of detailed lettering like this, because since the 60-degree V-bit has more of a sharp angle, it has to plunge down a little bit further to be able to connect both sides of those lines. And I'll show a graphic here that kind of explains that a little bit. So just as a simple general rule, remember that a 60-degree bit is going to have to plunge down further in order to connect two lines of a vector than a 90-degree V-bit will. So now that we have that set, we're just going to name this 60-degree lettering and go ahead and finish that off. Now the new toolpath that we're going to learn today is the advanced V-carve. And the advanced V-carve is slightly different than the V-carve. What advanced V-carve is going to do, it's going to pocket out the wide areas of this lettering with a flat bottom end mill. It's going to do that first. It's going to clear some of that area first. Then the V-bit's going to come around and trace the outside lines and kind of create a chamfer almost around the outside. So we'll click on Advanced V-carve. We're going to enable the pocket tool. So I'm going to use a number 102 1/8 inch end mill for this, because if I were to use anything bigger, it wouldn't fit in almost any of these spaces, so it wouldn't do us any good. So 1/8 inch is going to fit into a lot of these big areas here to clear them out. And I'm going to use a 90-degree V-bit on the remaining portions. So one thing you will also notice in the advanced V-carve toolpath menu, you're going to see that it has a start depth and a max depth as well. Now this will change how this engraves. And that is because since we're clearing out a flat bottom pocket of this lettering, the V-bit is now following like the perimeter of the vectors. It's not plunging down and connecting both lines of the vectors in the same way that a regular V-carve toolpath is. So we're just going to go down 0.1 inches, and I'll show you what this looks like. We'll run the simulation. So you can see in the O here, this in the O and the J here, these wide areas where the 1/8 inch bit can fit. It's clearing out and creating a flat bottom. See it here in the N, O, all these areas. The 90-degree V-bit is kind of coming around and chamfering the edges. So it's a little bit different look. I really like using this toolpath, especially when I'm painting these, because it gives you a nice flat bottom for all the paint to go into. And I also think it makes a really clean look. So we'll go ahead and hide that. So I'm going to edit this toolpath. I want to also add the and family to this toolpath. So I'm going to highlight them, double click on the advanced carve toolpath, and I'm going to change my vectors to my current selection. Hit OK. And there we go. All right, so we are almost done. The last toolpath we're going to be doing is our perimeter chamfer. This is where our rectangle that we added in the beginning is going to come into play. So we're going to highlight that rectangle, click on a contour toolpath, use current selection. We're going to edit our tool. We're going to go down to softwood, V-bits. We're going to use a 90-degree V-bit. Hit OK. We're going to go down 0.1 inches. Our offset direction is going to be no offset. We want it to run right on that line. We don't need to ignore tabs in this case because we will not be using tabs. This is all just going to be held down with clamps. We'll go ahead and name this our chamfer toolpath. There we go. Now let's see what it looks like. All right, looking pretty good. If I scroll down here and look at the side, you can see our chamfer. You know, the chamfer is not 100% necessary on this. You can easily do this with a palm router, put whatever edge you want onto it. Since it's already on the CNC, I kind of like to have the CNC do everything. But sometimes I do get my palm router out and put a different edge on it. All right, looking pretty good. So again, the reason I use a 60-degree V-bit for these smaller fonts here is just because they're pretty thin. And I'll zoom in here. If I were to use a 90-degree V-bit, it would not engrave as deep as what I have here because of the angle of the bit. It would connect the two lines of the vector earlier and shallower than the 60-degree V-bit does. So it gives me a little bit more depth, a little bit more area for paint to go into. With the stock toolpath settings from Carbide Create, we're looking at about a runtime of about 34 minutes here, but I think we can do a little bit better. Let's start with our 60-degree lettering. Go back to our tool, we'll edit that, and we're just going to go ahead and change the the feed rate to 65. Saved a minute there. On our advanced toolpath, we're going to go ahead and edit our 1/8 inch bit and change our feed rate to 25. And for our 90-degree, we're going to change it to 65. Still very conservative, but just by doing that, we're down to 26 minutes. I feel comfortable with that. You can always play with that. One of the great things about using Carbide Motion is you can change the speed of your tools on the fly with the controller by up to 100%. So as you're running these jobs and you're getting a feel for how the bits react and your speeds, what I would always do is play with that feature on carbide motion, just to kind of give me an idea about what the tools could do and what I could get away with, how fast I could go, and still get good cut quality. With this being pine, it's a very soft wood, so you can go fast, but I want to make sure that these engravings are nice and crisp because I'm going to be painting them. And I don't want to do a bunch of sanding afterwards to try to clean up some of these grooves. So I'm leaving it pretty conservative. All right, well that's it. Let's go ahead and save this project and get it on the CNC. So we have our stock here stained, nice and dry. Before I apply my aura mask to this, I am going to hit it with a coat of just regular spray shellac. And this is just going to help seal the fibers. So that way when I apply the masking and then I remove it, it's not going to pull up the wood fibers. It's also going to help the aura mask really stick well. So now my shellac is dry. I'm just going to take a light 120 sanding block and just lightly give this a sand. And I'll just wipe the dust off. And now I'm going to apply aura mask. I like to use aura mask number 813. It's just a masking film. So all aura mask does is once you apply it over the top of the wood, it's going to allow my CNC to go ahead and carve out all my letters. And it'll carve out the masking area and leave the rest of the film protecting my wood piece here, which I've stained, because I do not want to get paint on that. So let's go ahead and apply this. I've just cut out a scrap piece here. I know that my artwork starts at about 1 inch down from the top. So this is really important just to get on flat. I'm just going to lift up part of the adhesive backing here and just start it like that. And I'm going to lay this down. I have a little squeegee here. I'm just going to start this first strip here, make sure I don't have any air bubbles in, and then just remove the back. Go slow with my squeegee. There we go. Just kind of work from the inside out, making sure we don't get any air bubbles. The key to this is just the surface prep that I did beforehand, but also just making sure there's no air bubbles in it and it's fully pressed down. Okay, so that's good for now. We're going to use our J roller on this after when we're done, but we have one more small piece to put here. So I'm just going to eyeball this, give this a cut, install this piece in the same way. Now, it's really important. You do not want to overlap this. Okay, so there we have it. So I've measured this out. I believe I'm good here with my design. If I'm not, we'll find out, I guess. But one other reason that I apply a layer of shellac on this too, not only to help this bond, but it's also to protect the stain. So even if I'm off here, like with some of my design here, my little design element here, it might be off, but I'm going to leave it that way. Let's just see what happens, because the other reason I put the shellac on here is just to protect the stained area. If I do get paint overspray or my aura mask tears out a little bit and I get a little bleed, the shellac is going to allow me to clean that paint up a little bit easier. Okay, last step with aura mask is always to use a nice J roller here and really make sure this is pressed down. This is a really important step. This puts a lot more pressure than even the scraper that I was using does, and it really helps adhere this. All right, looking pretty good. Now let's get this thing on the CNC. All right, so as you can see behind me, I have my workpiece secured to my wasteboard now. So it might look like a little bit of a crazy clamp setup I've got going on right now. I've got both essential clamps pushing downward pressure on the piece, and I also have the crush it clamps giving sideways pressure. I'm doing that because not only am I going to be engraving the inside perimeter of this job, but I'm also adding that chamfer where I need to engrave the outside perimeter. So obviously if I left on these essential clamps pressing down, then my chamfer bit would hit that. So I'm going to be relying on my essential clamps giving that sideways pressure during the chamfering operation. If you haven't seen my video where I show how I upgrade my wasteboard for my Shapeoko CNC, go ahead and check that out after you're done watching this video. I'll leave a card for it here and the link for it down in the description. You'll see that it makes it really convenient to be able to place things pretty much wherever I want on the wasteboard setup. This could be kind of a challenging clamping operation with the stock setup. Because of the 16-inch width, it lines up really close to where these channels are. So I'm able to get a clamp in maybe on this side a little bit, but I'm not able to slide in a clamp on the T-track on this side. Now, you could position this board over to the left a little bit, maybe split the difference, and you might be able to get it to work, but sometimes you have to play around with that with the stock hybrid table. Not with my upgraded setup with all these threaded inserts. It really gives a lot more flexibility, and I've really been enjoying using this setup now. I offer files for this wasteboard for free. The link for that is attached to the wasteboard video. And I also sell them on my Etsy shop if you're interested and you don't feel like making them. I've made my wasteboard slats and the ones that I sell on Etsy out of 1-inch MDF, so it gives me a little extra surfacing capability. Another thing that I'm going to note is whenever you buy pine, or even if you glue up a panel, it's almost never completely flat. Unless you're going through the whole milling process with a joiner, planer, even after you do that and you glue it up, it still has a tendency to cup or bow sometimes, especially with a 16-inch by 20-inch panel or a larger panel. It just happens. It's kind of the nature of the beast. But one thing that I found you can do is use the clamps to your advantage in order to help flatten these pieces. You'll see on this piece, it had quite a substantial cup, maybe about a good 1/16, almost an 1/8 of an inch in the center where it was low and the ends were high. Now I oriented the board this way. I wanted that cup in that direction rather than the opposite, having the ends being low and the top being high, because I can use these clamps to my advantage and apply pressure to them evenly in order to help flatten out this panel. Now it's not flattening it permanently, although if I leave it on the CNC for long enough, sometimes it will acclimatize and kind of flatten itself out a little bit. But what it's doing is it's at least getting it as flat as I can for the V-carving operation. V-carving is very finicky when it comes to flatness of your panel. If you have high or low spots in your panel when you're trying to V-carve, you can get some funky results. So I've made a little sample board that I'll show up here that kind of illustrates this. Having your zero set either high or low, or having high or low spots in your board will affect your V-carving. But I found finding the flattest material that you can, and then using this clamping trick to get the board as flat as you can, and to zero your workpiece accurately, really helps with V-carving. Sometimes another tip is you might have to zero 2 or 3 times on the same project in order to get it to cut to the right depth. What I mean is sometimes if you have a low spot or a high spot in your board and you know it's there, and you know where your text is going to be lining up, I might break the text up into different G-code, into different sections. Zero first, and then run one group of text. Then I may re-zero at a spot where it's lower or higher, and then run that block of text. And then maybe even a third time or so. I don't do that too often because the method that I'm showing you now with the clamps really does work good. So hopefully that makes sense. You'll see how it all works out here once we get to carving. And if you have any questions about that, make sure you leave a comment down below. Now, one thing I should note, I did not show this during my Carbide Create explanation, but I have disabled my last toolpath, which is the chamfer toolpath. And initially, I'm only going to be running the V-carve and the advanced V-carve toolpaths. What that's going to let me do is it's going to give me a chance to run all my V-carves and then stop the machine, take off my essential clamps, which are holding downward pressure. So that way I only have the crusher clamps, which are applying sideways pressure. And then I can reload the file with only the chamfer toolpath enabled and just run that real quickly separately. All right, so I just want to bring you in here close to take a look at this. So you can see after the first pass of the 60-degree V-bit, it's looking pretty good. You know, the Oramask inevitably tears out a little bit, no matter what I've found with V-bits anyway. With 1/4-inch end mills or other end mills, it works pretty good, but the V-bits will tear it out a little bit. It can be cleaned up. See, like that part right, like that part right there. If you just kind of rub your fingers on it, it'll clean it up a little bit. You got to be careful because you don't want to rub it too hard where you lose some of like the little dots and the E's and the A's and the O. There's some small pieces in there, but just a little rub will take most of that off. And again, this is another reason why I like to do the shellac before I put the Aura mask on, because when I go to paint this, if I get a little bleed, all I got to do is wipe it off with a wet cloth. Alright, so here is the finished sign. Let's get it cleaned up. Alright, so the carve is done. Now we just got a little bit of cleanup work to do. So the best way I found to take care of the cleanup work is just a little nylon bristle brush like this. But we're just going to take this and we're going to kind of brush the inside of the letters just to get some of that sawdust out of there, just to make sure we've carved all the way. Let's go take care of that. So as you can see, I'm just going up and down, side to side, throughout all these letters. I'm just kind of getting all that Aura mask off there. That's kind of that fuzzy Aura mask, and also just making sure that the inside of my letters are nice and clean. And as you can see, that makes a really big difference. This engraving came out nice and clean. Let's get it painted up. All right, we're back on the assembly table. We're gonna go ahead and hit our edges with a little bit of stain. Okay, now after this dries, we're going to hit the whole entire thing with another layer of shellac, even inside the letters here. And again, that's just going to seal the wood fibers. It's going to help our paint adhere better inside here and get better coverage. And it's also, again, going to give us another layer of protection for these areas where we didn't put the Aura mask. So that way, when we go to paint these areas, the paint will just wipe off like nothing. All right, so the shellac is dry enough now where we can start painting. And what I like to do is just use a little paint. I like to just put it right on the Aura mask there, and I'm using just a little metallic acrylic paint for these little details here. And I'm just going to show you how good this works. I already did this side over here, but now I'm going to do this side. So I'm just going to use my little brush here, and I'm going to get it into my joint here. And I'm trying to be careful, but I mean, if it gets on the actual wood itself, it's okay at this point, because this acrylic paint is going to wipe right up since I've applied shellac to the piece already. Okay, so now I'm just going to take a little wet cloth here, kind of get it flat, and I'm just going to rub straight across. I'm not trying to rub it out of the groove. I'm just removing it from the surface. So there you go. Now, I wouldn't recommend doing this over the entire piece. It can be a little slow if you're doing the whole thing, but if you mess up in little spots like this, or if sometimes the small little parts in the E's or the A's, sometimes that little piece of Aura mask falls out like it did right here. So when I go ahead and paint this section here, the have, the A and have, I'm just going to take my cloth and kind of dab that little dot of the A, so that way the white paint gets off of it and it'll look nice. All right, so let's finish this up. I'm probably going to do 2 coats on each one of these because this gold paint is not showing up that great, but it's more of an accent anyway. I didn't want it to stand out too much, so I'll let that dry and I'll come back and do another coat, and then the rest of this is all going to be white. I also found that initially it's helpful to do like kind of a dabbing technique with the brush, and that really gets the paint down into the groove, and then you come back and just do a clean swipe over the top. Sometimes this takes 2 coats, but I'm going to try to get away with 1 coat in this situation. And this is the area where I have that A, where the dot came off of it a little bit. I'm just going to take my cloth and hit that just like that. And even if you get a little bit of bleeding on here, because sometimes the Aura mask peels off, like I got a little spot here that's peeling back, that's okay. When we take it all off, since we have shellac on this, I'm going to be able to hit it with a little bit of sandpaper, just with the grain, like a 220, and that'll clean that right off without getting down to the stain and removing any of the stain. And now that we have everything covered, I'm just going to go back with a little bit of extra paint, not a lot, and I'm just going to kind of try to remove any brush marks. I don't want to see a bunch of brush marks, and I also don't want to see a bunch of gooped in paint. So some places where I went a little heavy, I want to kind of get that paint out of there, spread it around. I'm not trying to fill these engravings with paint. I'm just trying to cover them with paint. Sometimes in these small 60-degree areas, it can be easy to kind of fill the area with paint. If you do that, the paint, when it dries, it'll kind of shrink up and leave little holes and looks kind of ugly. So I want to try to avoid that as much as possible. It'll help save me some touch-up when this thing's dry. Okay, I've let this dry for about 20 minutes or so. And the good thing about this acrylic paint is that it does dry very fast. So I'm going to start peeling off some of this masking. So a little tedious with the weeding tool, but it pays off because this came out just excellent. All right, the sign is coming along. It is almost done. The lettering is dry and everything is looking great. No bleeding. I like it. The next thing we got to do is just take a little bit of 220 sandpaper on a sanding block, hit the entire sign just to help even things out. Then we're going to take our little wood branding medallion here that we're going to put. I put these on all of our products just to get our name out there. They look really nice. Make these on our laser. And then we're just going to put a small little sawtooth hanger, press-in sawtooth hanger on the back. I buy these in bulk. They work really nice, easy to install. And of course, the last step is one more coat of shellac over the entire front and back, and that's just going to level everything out, give it a nice finish. It's going to be looking great. So what do you think? I really like this beginner project because of how customizable it is. There's so many different options that you can do just with this simple sign. Again, this does not have to be limited to a family sign like I did here. This could be a sign for anything. You can make signs for weddings, baby showers, kids' rooms, businesses, you name it. The possibilities are endless. And using these principles, you'll be able to make any sign that you want. So many possibilities. And if you're not interested in selling these, that's cool. I've given away a lot of these as gifts and everybody really likes them. Well, that's going to do it for this episode. Remember, if you have any questions, make sure you leave them in the comments below. If you like the video, make sure you give it a thumbs up because that really helps out the channel. And also make sure you're subscribed so that you don't miss out on anything. That's it for today. I'll catch you on the next one.